Jerry was ahead of me 1 year in the seminary, so I've always been following in his footsteps as I'm back. Tonight, Father Jerry comes to us because he's been designated by the Bishop of St. Paul as a liaison to the Native community in this diocese. Tonight he's going to share with us some of that history of the church with the Native community, and he may touch a little on how his current designation as liaison is moving forward for us. So give a welcome to Father Jerry Schick.
So we'd like to begin with prayer, and of course, from my experience, the most beautiful language is the Ojibwe language, so Rick will lead us in prayer.
Okay, so I'm happy to do this. Like Father said, Ojibwe is one of the most beautiful languages in the world. Guinness Book of Records says it's one of the most difficult languages in the world. I always tell people it's easy, but some words that you should know, and a lot of words you already know and don't realize it probably, like moccasin is an Ojibwe word, moose is an Ojibwe word, that'll become English. The word, pecan, bagan means a nut. So there's a number of words that have come into it. And anybody that's been around the lakes and the rivers know that there's an impact of heritage throughout Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and so forth, the Ojibwe country, even North Dakota, Montana, and also to the provinces of Canada. So Ojibwe is the second largest area-wise of all the Indian nations in North America. Well, specifically United States and Canada. So, yeah. Anyway, as I pray this evening, and I'll pray, I want to explain some words as we go through it. So, a lot of you heard the word Nokomis. How many have heard like Nokomis? That means my grandmother. Okay, Nokomis. And Nimashomis is grandfather. So a lot of times you can address those two, because there's a belief that throughout the whole world, that when the Creator made this world, He put helpers in each of the directions. And you guys know some of the direction words already. For example, in Ojibwe prayer, we start in the east. And that's Waban. A lot of you heard the word Waban, because up over there in the White Earth Reservation, there's a community called Waban. It means the dawn, it means the east. It's where the sun comes from, where it greets us. Then it's Jawan, that's the south. And like the Shawnee people, there would be people of the south. Now, the west is where the sun sets, in Pangshimun or in Ningabian, so that's maybe not that familiar, but the north is Giwaden. So if you've heard of a town like Keewatin, it should really be pronounced Giwaden, and that means the north. So in each of these directions, then, there is spirits and helpers that the Creator has put there to help the people, So a lot of times in Ojibwe prayer, you will call on those spirits, and we'll also call on Mother Earth and Father Sky, or the leader in the sky. It's called Naganazin. Naganazin, Manidu. Manidu, like the word Manitoba, Manidu means spirit, mystery. So it's not, gender specific per se, but that is the spirit. And so, thank you, Father Jerry, for giving me the chance to pray. Many years ago, my wife and I helped to start a parish in the Archdiocese of Minneapolis, St. Paul, called Gishitwakateri. And one of the things that we do over there is a lot of the prayers and the songs and that are in Ojibwe language, and I translate a lot of those songs from let's say the Psalms or whatever into Ojibwe, and it's really I think the gift. Everyone in our group right here is gifted in different ways, but one of the ways that I think I've been gifted is with language and culture and understanding that way. So that is one of the things we want to pray for tonight is understanding and healing. So Nunkumigo, Nimigoichu, and Imagigu, Manidu, Nimashomas, Minawano, Kumis, Eaegama, Wabanunga, Javanung, Diningabianunga, Giwaitanung. Nukumis, Minawa, Nimama, Nan, Uaki, Minawa, Ao, Naganazik, Manidu, Spaming. Takabizanda Washinam, Nunkum, we do Kawashinam, Ganawina Mishnam, Gae. We ask you to take care of us, to listen to us, and help us. Jinisidu tamang iyo, to understand guys way back may one jabo, the things that have happened in history long ago. Gina na too young ago that we can fix certain things today if we can. You know, what can the church do? Help them, what the government can do, help them. There's been a lot of suffering in the past, and there's a need for healing. So nungo me go ni bago say ni mag you money do. We do kage yet. Mino bemadizimen. Minoa nuchi amoen. Nungo me go miigwech dina money do. Moshkawazid, Moshkawaziwa, Tikio Anishinabeg. Anishinabeg are the Indian people, the human beings of this land here. Oh, Menising, this island, oh, King, Jawanim, no, we do power, Tinoji, Moa, help them in their healing. Nungumigo, Nimago Seni Magigu Manido. Chikana Waki, we do Kawishina, we need to be Moseyang, Loma King, we do Kudadiang, Chinisitutadiang, Chishawen Dia, Nungum Miwait. Aha, thank you. Okay. Aha.
Amen.
Miwait, Gegin means thanks to you too. Miwait Gegin.
So by means of methodology here, I know we learn by hearing and we learn by seeing. And I'm going to give you a chance to learn, first of all, by hearing them. I got papers here, I'll give them to you later. You know, don't worry about that part. But just let yourself experience what you hear, and then we'll read this later. But just let yourself close your eyes or whatever it takes to be in a listening mode, okay? So for me, the title here and always is Federal Indian Boarding Schools. A lot of times we don't catch that part, the federal part. It was inaugurated by the federal government of the United States in the 1800s, and we'll talk more about that, but the first school opened in 1878, and the last school opened in 1978. So we'll just say 100 years to be practical. And the stated goal of the federal government was to force young Indians into the American culture mainstream. How? By removing the Indian from the Indian. So how do you do that? Well, you take away with children. Now we're dealing with people from the age of 6 to 18, basically. So they would be taken from their homes and placed into boarding schools off the reservation, so not on any reservation land. So separated, therefore, from any language or music or Indian culture or religious practices. All that was taken away from them. And the methodology was very military. So, in fact, a lot of the schools, maybe half the schools, were run by military groups, the Army and so on, and maybe another half by religious groups, Methodists or Anglican Catholic. But you know, we have to realize the origin of this is the decisions of the federal government, the Congress and the President. And then the methodology was very militaristic, very strict, and I'll explain some of that. But anyway, the first Indian boarding school was the Carlisle Indian School. If you do any research or any connection with Carlisle, you're going to hear that word all the time. 1878, the Carlisle School. And of course, first thing you're trying to do is dissolve tribal identity. So you keep, that's why boarding school. You try to keep the students away from the tribe that they come from. Now they can go home in the summertime. Well, on paper they can go home in the summertime, but a fair number could not afford even that traveling. You know, in other words, a student from this area would very likely be in South Dakota, North Dakota, Wisconsin. You know, they wouldn't be anywhere near their homeland. And so they were pretty well pulled into the American were supposed to be assimilated into. And during the 20th century, 100,000 Indian children attended the boarding schools. 500 boarding schools were set up by the government. And a lot of problems. The schools had insufficient food for the kids, poor sanitation, constant shortages of funding, very poor or no teaching supplies. All that was supposed to be supplied by the federal government, which sometimes came through here and there, now and then. But there was kind of a feeling of racism, like, well, I guess we really don't have to do that, you know, even though it's law. Now maybe we can cut it in half, or whatever, the food or whatever. So, and again, the sanitation is a real problem. And, you know, if you go back 100 years, I mean, we're not talking about today's sanitation, we're talking about the outhouse, okay? And then you have a whole bunch of kids in a certain area, and, well, anyway, the product of elimination goes into the soil, which goes into the water, which, you know, ruins the water, diphtheria, things like that develop. So that's why the estimate right now, and they're very confident, is that at least 500 students died. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but, and there's of course more to it. You have the physical abuses and the sexual abuses. And that part I find hard to talk about. I've been to 2 workshops on those abuses against persons, against the kids, and maybe I can talk about it. It gets very emotional because it was very painful how the kids were treated. Again, to get them to shape up, you know, and not use their language, not sing their songs, they're being punished left and right in a very military fashion. Okay, then the effects on the children and their families. Well, what do the students experience? Of course, cultural alienation, but then confusion, you know, they kind of know where they're coming from, the values and so on of their parents, and maybe some of the language, and then now they're supposed to do this other language, and so there's confusion and resentment and homesickness of the kids. And then the military discipline was totally against what they grew up with, so, again, they leave home at 6 years old, but I mean, the military discipline said no physical contact, no touching anybody, no hugging, no handshakes. So they lost all of that. And then all of a sudden at age 18, they're sent home, back to the reservation. And then soon they become parents, and then they begin to parent in the only way they know how, military way. See, so again, no hugging, no touching, no hand, you know what I mean? That's what they learned in the school, as being the correct way, the American way. And so they're not doing what people would do if they were allowed to be parents, you know, in the normal, natural way. And I know I find myself, whenever I'm up at Neosho at the school, I've been there when it's 3:15 or whenever school let out, and I see now the parents just go overboard hugging the kids, you know. I mean, they know from their parents and grandparents all that military stuff was wrong. and we got to recover our normal, natural way of parenting. Grabbing the kids, giving them the hugs, you know, not ever turning your back on a kid, all that kind of thing. So, and then Rick would talk about that being principal at that school for a while, so that also. Okay, and then you have to also realize, especially with teenagers, there's rebellion and resistance. So even though the school is in session and all that for 9-10 months of the year, the students are finding ways to mock the teachers or get together and use some of their language when nobody's looking, or share some of the games they learned. Our Indian people have a lot of really fun games. And you know, they'd be resisting, maybe not every child, but I mean, they were resistant to what they were being told to do. And so, in the end, the boarding schools actually were not able to break all the traditions and all the family bonds. The Kids still love their parents, parents still love their kids, as best they could, when they could, how they could, you know, they would find ways.
So,
Material.
yeah, so Father Jerry was talking about how the government officials oftentimes were the disciplinarians in the schools, and so there was a merit system and had a demerit system. And Richard Pratt, the one who started it in Carlisle, the motto was, kill the Indian, save the man. That's the way they said it, kill the Indian, meant everything Indian, kill it. And boarding school is kind of close to me personally because my wife was in boarding school and so was my mother-in-law. I mean, so it's pretty close, and we know the kind of, like my mother-in-law, she says, they were trying to turn us into brown-white people, you know. That's the way she would talk about it. And she says, I felt like a real dummy. She says, after having gone to the school, she says, I felt like a dummy. She says, I didn't know how to pick medicines, she says, you know, in the woods and the swamps and that, which my mother knew, she says, but I wasn't with my mother, you know. I was in the boarding school. And so the teachers, the message they would give is, you're not going to need to know any of that stuff. That's of the past. You just need to know, you know, the present and the future. That's the way that the teachers would talk to the kids. And yeah, she said, I didn't know how to make snowshoes. I didn't know how to do this or that, which were survival skills that people did need. And then because they were not with their families. And during the winter times when the stories are told, the most sacred legends and stories, and where were they during the winter? In the boarding schools. And some kids never got to go home during the summers. Some did, you know, and Jim Clark, one of our elders from Mille Lacs here, who went to boarding school, he was able to get home in the summer times, and he was able to keep his language. And when they would try to talk English at home, his grandmother, who had big influence in the family, says, you're Anishinaabe, you need to talk Anishinaabe. That English is not yours, you know, Anishinaabe language is yours. But for a lot of kids, they lost their language. They were beat, and there was even a jail in the boarding schools for kids that were out of line. So talk about the militaristic part of it. Yeah. Thank you.
Were there some larger schools, or were they pretty consistent, a couple hundred students? I mean, just to get an overview of the magnitude.
Terrific variety, yeah, large, small, all kinds, yeah. Yeah. So I'll give an example. So in November, every year, you have the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. Everybody knows about that in November. And so they met, the bishops of our country met, and they had a kind of a clause or proposal or whatever, encouraging each other to go home and really work hard on relationships with our Indian people, and again, be most pastoral, caring, and looking at the possibilities of reconciliation, and make sure you do that in such a way that our Native people are actually setting the agenda, I'm going to put it that way. You know, so it's not like, here we are, the big white people coming to, again, tell you what to do and how to think. No, work on setting the agenda, work on it together as best you can, but don't be a bishop. You know, don't be so much in charge, but rather be a listening person and a healing person, and a person giving power, returning power to those that we took the power. We took their power away in how we treated our Native peoples. And so, with that in mind, and very quickly, by that I mean December 7th already, Archbishop had of St. Paul, Minneapolis, he had called a meeting, or not called a meeting, that's not right, had negotiated with all the tribes of the state of Minnesota, all the chiefs and all the councils of the chiefs, you know, to have a gathering. And again, and I just see the great wisdom of this. The understanding was, from the side of the bishops, we most definitely want to meet, but we want to meet on your soil. You know what? We're not asking you to come to St. Paul or Duluth or something, you know. And so the meeting was held, and I've got a whole big write-up here about the meeting that everybody can have a copy of that from the Catholic newspaper of St. Paul, Minneapolis. But anyway, so the meeting was held, and all the bishops were there except two, and then Bishop Kettler couldn't be there, so he sent me, so I get to sit with the bishops, you know. I did, I mean, I didn't want to, I got argued with him, and then I gave in. But I said that's no way to hold a meeting with Indian people, but, well, anyway. It don't look like one side against another, is my point. But the content of what was said was very personal and very relational, so it wasn't all that bad. But, so the meeting was held on December 7th at the conference center of the Mille Lacs Band. So the other bishops had to come from Crookston and Duluth and wherever they came from, and I had to drive 13 miles. So we met, and again, the topic of the boarding schools was part of the discussion, a big part. And as far as next step, then the bishop said that they would do everything that they could to look into all of their archives to see what they might learn. Who knows? Maybe nothing. See, maybe there's nothing there. But generally, there's correspondence back and forth. So, for example, it could happen that from one of the boarding schools, a letter was sent to the bishop of that area. 2 of our children died today, or something like that. Might show up, but maybe not. See, and so of course my area from the delegation of the St. Cloud bishop is: do we have any correspondence of any kind with boarding schools within our boundaries? Well, actually, within the St. Cloud Diocese, only one boarding school. It was only for 9 years. It was from 1886 until 1895. Very short span. And actually, we couldn't find any correspondence between, say the bishop and the school was, if you want to say subcontracted. Of course, the federal government runs these things in a sense. But it was a group of Sisters of Mercy from Ireland who ran the school, who built the school building and ran the school for 9 years. But they just bailed out because the federal government was not giving them food and money, textbooks, and after 9 years of fighting, they just said, well, we're out of here. And they moved to Oregon. So there sits this empty building, and of course it reverts back to the federal government, right? I mean, actually the federal government paid them a few dollars for it, but it goes back to the federal government. And then they ran a boarding school at that location. Well, I forgot, Morris, Minnesota, or at least what later was called the town of Morris. So they ran the school, the federal government ran the school, and then for some reason things weren't going so well. So they sold that building to the state of Minnesota, and then today that building is located on the campus of University of Minnesota Morris. So, and there is rumor, haven't been proven, but during that time period of the sisters or the federal government running the school, that 2 students died and were buried there. Students were dying all the time, but mostly they could be sent back home if the parents came and got the body, But sometimes the parents didn't have the kind of money or whatever it would take to go, we're not talking automobiles, but we're talking horse and buggy. And so, yes, there would be burials at some of the schools, near the schools or whatever. That would happen. And so we don't have any evidence in the archives of the diocese of anybody dying during our time period, namely those 9 years that Catholics were actually involved with a boarding school in this diocese. Now, there are other boarding schools, of course, across the state, and up in the Red Lake area or White Earth and so on. Net Lake, there are others. But anyway, I did my job, which was almost nothing. I just had to contact the archivist of the diocese and back and forth and type letters and get everything on paper, hard copies, of what we don't know. We don't know it. We know on record nothing about anybody dying during that time period of 9 years. But that's just this diocese. The point is the other dioceses really have to work hard to see if they have any correspondence between the persons operating the school and the diocese itself. But that's the stage we're at now. So another way to put it, we're following a procedure called Truth and Reconciliation, and the point is, the first thing you work on is truth. try to get as many truths as possible on the table, as reported by our native people, truths reported by churches, governments, and so on. Let's get as many truths on the table as we can, and so that when we move toward reconciliation, it's a slow process, but as we move in that direction, we will not be based on somebody's homegrown theory or whatever. Okay, Eva?
Do you know how many deaths they've discovered so far?
In Minnesota? No, they haven't told us that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right, it's a good question, but we don't know what the diocese did. Again, but it's a good question in this sense. Each diocese reports to the tribal council of the state of Minnesota. A council, perhaps I used the wrong word, but there is a council of all of the tribes of Minnesota together.
That's
So-
called, you mean talking about Minnesota Chippewa Tribe?
Yeah,
So that's in Cass Lake, in each reservation, except for Red Lake. Red Lake has
Right.
got their own Chippewa tribe, so there's 2 Chippewa tribes in Minnesota.
right, and yes, and of course, yeah, the Dakota were there too, of course, at this meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that, this is something a little bit different, but St. John's had a, what did they call it, a vocational or a type of school, and probably St. Benedict's had something too, and those were boarding schools, but those kids were not forced to go there,
Right.
okay? And kids did die there too. I've been like to the cemetery at St. John's, and you'll see you'll see some gravesites of children.
So my second question was, do they have an estimated end date as to when they want this
No.
first stage of the procedure to be completed?
There really is no end date because they want to be thorough. I mean, it's like they want to pursue truth. And it's in the heart of each bishop how hard he wants to work on it. But the bishops that were there, I mean, of course, Archbishop Hebda himself calling, not like a calling meeting, but working hard to have that meeting so quick 1 month after the bishop's meeting, he really wanted it. All the tribal councils, I think there's 11 in Minnesota, wanted it too. So it happened really fast. People's heart is very much into it. And again, it's not just because they discovered all the grave sites in Canada, but it's because of realizing the harm that we participated in, okay? And we want to be straightforward about that, what we as an institution did to people, and how that needs to be rectified.
Is there any parallel effort by the federal government in
Yes,
this equation too?
yes, very much so.
While you're looking for that, I'll just mention that White-Earth, and a lot of you are familiar with White-Earth and Crookston Diocese, had a you could say a Catholic, Indian boarding school there. And also there was one in Red Lake. Those were very, very big in terms of kids from other reservations ended up going to those 2 also. And then there were a number of government boarding schools like Wapaton, North Dakota, was like elementary, still exists today, and Flanders, South Dakota. Back in the day, a real big one in Minnesota was in Pipestone. That was a real big boarding school there. So, where my wife is from, Lake Vermilion, they had one right there. And that's where my mother-in-law went. Her family lived right there and she couldn't go home. Can you imagine what that's like? She had to stay in the school, even though her parents lived right in the same community.
Did you find a list of names? Do you know in this diocese, in yours research, was there in the archives names if the families wanted to find out where their children?
Well, the diocese doesn't have any kind of list. It just doesn't. No correspondence with the sisters who ran the school. I mean, it's a great question, but that's part of the complexity of this. Where is that list? Where are the Sisters of Mercy? Or, do they still exist? And some parents and grandparents, not parents, but maybe grandparents and uncles and aunts might know of a certain child who went to school there. area, so no digital recording of things. I mean, things are a bit oral tradition, trying to find out by talking to people. Do you know somebody who went to this or that school? Yeah, Doug?
So you talked about what, we did as an institution and coming to terms with that and everything. So for a little context, can you talk about the doctrine of discovery?
Yeah.
You probably were, but
That's
I think it'd be nice now to just
Yeah.
sort of know the foundation of this
Yeah.
weird thinking about.
Yeah, so I want to present to you this piece of paper, the federal experience within the United States, okay? Now, let's see, I want to give, I got it right here, okay? Let's see, okay. So, of course, it's all about attitudes and philosophy, all right? And we have to go way back. Okay, way back means 1452. 1452, and the Pope was Nicholas V, and he sent out a document called Romanus Pontifex, and he was authorizing European agents, European countries, to invade, search out, capture, and vanquish all pagans, wherever they are. Now, it's a little hard for us to understand, but the Pope in those days had as much power as the King of Germany or the King of France, or, it was a different, rulings came out of the Vatican, and he assumed himself to be above all these other presidents and of other countries. And he got away with it, okay? Because everybody was Christian, in Europe. So he directed that document to the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, and said, all movable and immovable goods whatsoever are to be taken away from people who are pagan, and they are to be reduced to perpetual slavery. So this is, 1452, so that's a little while before Columbus even sailed the ocean blue. I'm just make sure we get that clear now. We're going way back, and the church is authorizing its members to take all the possession, land especially, from people, and then move on to reduce them to perpetual slavery. So when governors and kings and whatever wanted to do something, they had the Pope's approval, see, to move out to wherever, not just America, but I mean, in any direction. If you're located somewhere in Europe, you can go to Poland or Russia or wherever, and you find somebody that's pagan, and you can capture them and take their land and farm, and because they're not Christian. So that's the kind of origin of this movement that was then invoked so much later by the United States in the early 1800s. But that was the attitude and philosophy. If you discover a piece of land or you discover some people, they're yours. They belong to you because you're a Christian. You're better than them. And you have the Pope's approval to turn them into slaves and take their land. Nobody's questioning it. That's life. That's the kind of atmosphere people were living in. And then that just was perpetuated century after century by the Christians. Now, of course, later, the Christians became somewhat divided, Protestants and Catholics, but again, this is long before the division of Protestants versus Catholics. I mean, everybody was Catholic, if you want to use those words, or everybody was Christian. Everybody was under that assumption that it's what we do. That's just how we live. Got all these pagans out here, let's take their land and possessions, and unless they convert, of course. And we just had, all that happening in the world. I mean, in the European world, of course, not Asian, but you get the feeling for that. It's like, well, it's just natural that we possessions and land away from people because they won't cooperate. They won't become one of us Christians. We're the good guys. And it's hard for us until we get into these documents that, it's like, oh, the Pope really said that, reduce these people to perpetual slavery. So, I mean, people didn't question,
Recently, both nationally and locally, this has been in the news programs about an awareness of the schools and whatever. How much of that awareness is being fostered or it came to a consciousness because of the church saying, oh, we were a part of this? Or was it national or international foment that brought this awareness and these news reports to us in the last few months?
Well, actually, more accurately, it really began to bubble to the surface in 1926, when the federal government itself did an evaluation of what's going on here and how are we treating people, and reforming so that the curriculum became better and, better quality and better teachers and no more abuse. Of course, there's still abuse, but I mean, riding herd on the schools instead of just letting them go wherever they wanted. Now, they were partially successful, but I mean, this awareness, I would say, goes back to the 1920s. And really high awareness, of course, in the 1970s and 80s. But there have always been seeds of concern and doubt about how we're treating people, in this case, children. And then, of course, currently we have a couple things. In the federal government now, with the Department of the Interior giving us a document that they worked on for several years, but just last month, in the month of May, I believe it was May 9th, but anyway, a document came out from the Department of the Interior of our country saying there's just so much here we have to look at, so much that we've discovered. It makes us wonder even more about how people were treated. And then, of course, we have the church awareness of how people have been treated. And what can we do to reverse that?
The church wasn't on the front line of
No,
this at all.
I don't think so.
In my experience, no. No.
Okay.
Well, yes and no. The church, I'm sure there were good Christian people back in the 1920s who were feeling, we can't do this anymore. And they may have acted in and through the government, but they were also acting in and out of their hearts. So maybe the official church hierarchy, no, okay. But the real church, the people, they were part of this discovery of how things are not done fair to people. And looking down on people and saying you're not fully human if you're not Christian, all that. People question that. As they did, of course, earlier, a few years earlier with allowing women to vote, and a few years earlier with the allowing the setting free the slaves, as we do today, Juneteenth. Okay, good. Hi, good.
I would just like to add a little bit of my experience of having worked out here at the Mille Lacs Reservation since the early 70s. And I had no awareness at all of any of these schools that kids were ever taken to. That was nothing that I had ever learned about. When I was there working here at the Mille Lacs Band, at all of their different locations. But anyway, I would see patients, and it was busy enough that I couldn't keep up with the chart working. And there was a native lady in her, very early 60s, who was hired to be my assistant in that she would, pull out the records of the people and that sort of thing. And I was trying to keep up with the charting. And I started dictating. And she said, I can write that for you, when you're done. And she had lovely handwriting that was in the charts, the things that I had dictated. And I asked her one time, where did you go to school? And she just looked just kind of lost for a little bit. that wasn't really wanting to respond. And she said, I was taken to a school near a military base in Wisconsin. And that's all she said about it. Not a word more about it. So that had to have been such a devastation experience for her as a kid. And it just made me, when I learned about that, made me very angry about white society to these people who are no different than we are, just haven't had privileges that we have had in so many areas. And she continued working, in the capacity with me. And she would translate. When there were people who came in who did not speak English, she was the translator. She never made home visits with me, but people who would come in with me. And I also served, because the reservation really goes all the way over to Wisconsin and north, parts of Aiken, all the way in
Big
south.
Sandy.
It's quite large. And I was given a native person to assist me when I was out making home visits, because I would need a translator in a number of these homes that were primarily older people. And over time, they trusted me. One of the big concerns they did have is she trying to make us Catholic? Something like that. That was part of it. It took a while for them to trust. But once they understood, I'm just here for you, then I was accepted. And I was very grateful for that, being accepted. There's no question about it. Anyway.
Talk about lived experience.
Over 32 years. But
Yeah. As you speak, I'm thinking, I think Rick's heard this. John has said, there's another way to look at reality. Very much what Gert had just said. You go to sign up for something and you have all these boxes to check, African American, Asian American, Caucasian. What if it just said human and not human? What more do you need to know about anybody, right? You're going to care for them as a nurse would do. What more do you need to know? Let's just get this straight here now, instead of delineating everybody, putting everybody in some sort of box.
I just filled out the paperwork for my COVID booster a couple days ago. When I came to race, I wrote human, and I was waiting to see if they would look at it and say something, but nobody cared. Isn't that funny?
But the reason you have all those boxes is economic. If you're in this box, you can get some benefits for that box, and I think it became a delineation, not just a racist thing, but a financial thing, and if you would fit into those boxes, we knew how to deal with you, which is sad. I'm surprised that he listed himself as human.
And now he's gone.
Yeah.
Question, when you're doing this truth and reconciliation process, is there any communication going on between other churches besides Catholic, or is it just a Catholic focus?
I don't know of any other. On one hand, I do know that, the Minnesota Council of Churches definitely has, on their agenda all the time and so on. But I don't know of any cooperation between us and them, so to speak.
Yeah, this seems like.
It's such a complex thing. We're trying to do a couple steps at a time here.
Yeah, but maybe over time that might
Right.
evolve into that next
Right.
phase.
Oh, we most definitely want that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Rick?
Yeah, so President Grant, during his time, they had what was called like a grant peace policy, and what they did was they kind of divided up reservations, which ones would be Catholic, which ones would be Episcopal, and so forth, and they did that in part of the assimilation kind of thing in history, so a number of the reservations here in Minnesota were designated as one or the other. That was one point I wanted to make. But See what else? Oh, Canada has started this a number of years ago already, and it seemed like almost all the boarding schools in Canada were church affiliated, either with the Catholic or with the Church of England or whatever. But they started this process of reconciliation, and what they would do is give these survivors of boarding school sort of an interview and find out how they may have been abused. And a number who had been abused, emotionally, sexually, psychologically, physically, all these different ways, they gave them a certain kind of a settlement, a monetary settlement for these survivors of boarding school. So a couple of my friends went through that, and so this is a few years back that the Canadian government made some kind of a settlement. Today, we don't have so many survivors. A lot of them are parents or grandparents that have passed already, and yet this, what they call historical trauma, passes on through their generations. So even if a young person didn't experience that, perhaps their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents did, and it affects them. Part of from what Father Jerry was talking about was, this, even, having to learn in a sense how to love yourself, how to love your culture, how to love, when the schools and that were saying that's all bad.
Well, you learn to parent from your parents.
Yeah,
And if they weren't with their parents,
right, they learned,
How
like
do you
he said,
learn?
sort of the whole military style of treatment, Oh, and then a lot of people when they're suffering, turn to drugs and alcohol and so forth, so you have that. Yeah.
Just to appreciate the magnitude, Rick, you had mentioned that not all the kids were forced into these boarding schools, and some went.
Well, almost all of them, at one point in history, they seemed like more or less all had to go. What I was saying was like with St. John's and with St. Benedict's, those were more like, choices that they might have at some point later, So Sister Laura, who was here, made sure that I think that a few of the girls from here went down there to St. Benedict's. And yeah, she had been at Red Lake before she came to.
She was a Benedictine.
Yeah, she's
Or was
Benedictine.
Benedictine.
From St. Benedict's. Yep. And but I can tell you that Crookston Diocese with Red Lake and White Earth, they're dealing with a lot more deaths and so forth, I'm sure, death of children. So.
Yeah, again, just the whole sanitation situation 100 years ago,
And then
everywhere children are dying.
And then the closeness, if you can imagine the closeness
Yeah.
of the cramped quarters and all that, disease was rampant a lot of times.
And so, one of the parts of the whole truth thing is if we can get the truth about some of these children and their burial sites and so on, then their family members have a place to go to grieve. And again, it might be the great-grandchild of the person who died, or or great-great-uncle or aunt, or that sort of thing. But still, having a place to go to grieve is very helpful, and it helps today's individual to know their heritage, and perhaps even why they have trouble with identity, why they experience shame, because their ancestors did not have identity. It was taken away from them. But also, some of them were fighting, so to speak, when there was some knowledge that the boarding school police were coming, the kids would go hide in the woods, they didn't all go, so to speak. If they could successfully hide, they would. And of course, their uncles and aunts and so on would help them hide. That's all part of family bonding. Bridge.
Regarding magnitude, something that shocked me when I was reading that article in the Archdiocese paper recently that had happened there. If I remember correctly, at one point, 85% of all Native American children were in these boarding schools. That's huge, 85%. And probably that percentile is going to be corrected as more and more information comes to the fore.
Yeah, and again, if you have any opportunity, Doug's kind of suggested here, you know, if you see the words doctrine of discovery, jump up and read it. To know where we come from our side, as we gave ourselves permission to do these things to other people. And again, these other people may be black. I mean, the goal, the doctrine of discovery was long before the United States and Christopher Columbus and all that, you know, so it was a worldwide effort, so to speak, because of manifest destiny, we're the best, and therefore everything belongs to us. Every piece of land.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that on YouTube, for example, you could see Doctrine of Discovery. You could look that up, and there's a really good video on it. And also a video called American Horse. I believe that's the name of it. Have you seen it? American Horse. And that kind of goes through what the boarding school experience was like. It's a very new movie, so American Horse. And as a kid who grew up in Canada and became a hockey player, you know, and he was abused, and it shows that part too, that he's actually abused by a clergy person. So, yeah, American Horse is the name of it. So, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that we don't know about. You know, a lot of good stuff on there.
And also, the reason we're pretty much aware of the historical trauma that people are experiencing today is we have recordings, oral recordings now, maybe from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, you know. People spoke, they weren't writers necessarily, but they spoke to microphones and people were recording. So we got some pretty good insights into what life was like in the boarding schools from real people that were there. But although it's painful, I don't know if it's for everybody. You know, I found some of it very painful. And that's describing the punishments, for example. I want to make sure to mention this very brief, but I think it was in March, but a couple months ago, Pope Francis made his historic apology for abuses in Canada at the church-run boarding schools. And he expressed sorrow and shame for the lack of respect for the people, their cultures, and their spiritual values. And he said to the Native people that he met with, they came to see him, he said he wants to go to Canada to deliver the apology personally. So that's Canada. What's happening with the United States, I don't know of anything. Nobody knows of anything yet. I know that our Native people and our Native Catholics have asked the Pope to apologize, but I'm just saying it has not happened here in the U.S., although it has happened in Canada. And so it kind of gives you hopefulness, you know, that we're next. But I don't know when.
I want to mention that Archbishop Hebdare, for whatever reason, he's very interested in this, and he, a few years ago, he volunteered, say, the Native communities in Minnesota to sponsor the National Teguitha Conference. So this year it's in Louisiana, but next year it's going to be in Minneapolis. So if anybody here wants to help out, I know they need volunteers for sure. But it's a gathering of Indian Catholics and you could say like priests and religious that are involved, sisters that are involved in Indian work throughout the whole nation. And it's been going on for at least 50 years that we have these annual get-togethers. And I've been to, my first wife and I, we probably went to about 20 of them with our family. So.
What will your role be going forward?
Well, my role is to do what the bishop tells me to do.
What has he told you so far?
To most correctly, 100% correctly, it's to be in relationship with as many people as possible. So it's not a bureaucratic thing or an office job. It's to be in relationship. And now Bishop Kettler, of course, was in Alaska before coming here.
With Native people.
So he was very much in tune with the Native people there. And simultaneously, with the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, he's been a member of their Ministry to Native People Council, or committee, or whatever it's called, commission. So again, agenda. And then the new Bishop of Duluth came on Green Bay, Wisconsin, where he did a lot with Native folks. I just can't remember his name now. I don't want to guess. But anyway, so we're getting good leadership from our bishops, in my mind. Really wanting to be in relationship with people, in conversation, and again, give power to the people that we took power away from. And then that's healing for them, but then it's healing for us as we get into a more equal level of relating. So, Marie?
Yeah, in your work in developing relationships with people, what would you say is the most success you've had and what has been the most challenging?
Well, the most challenging is easy. It's other Catholics. they find it hard to get to know the great mystery. What do I mean by that? Well, how to look at life, to know the mystery within each rock and tree and leaf and feather. You see. Now, some people deliberately, Rick can agree or disagree, I'm deliberately not saying Great Spirit, but that's a frequent translation of honeydew. But when we start talking spirit, we think, oh, three persons in one God, but it's only spirit, so the spirit is a person. And the spirit is not a person, see. The spirit is a mystery, a movement, an energy. Found absent in that carpet, it doesn't matter what direction I look, light, darkness, it's all of honeydew, all of mystery. Like one time, about a year ago, last summer, I believe, there was a burial at St. Teresa, a Native person. And when we're walking from the cemetery back to the church, these kids are just getting all excited about what? Little feathers that they found as we're walking, not eagle feathers, just little crummy little feathers from a sparrow or whatever. But for them, that's just the greatest discovery. It's discovering God, They just got all carried away with these little feathers that they found. And others found little pebbles. And that's where it is. And so it's so hard. What's difficult? It's so hard for me because I don't really know how to explain to Catholics, except maybe St. Francis and his friendship with the wolf. I mean, I don't know any other way to let people know how we have the sacred mystery in all of life, in all persons. So, okay, then the other thing, success. Just people trusting me, and Rick could verify this, I think, Gert as well. There is no more sacred place than the burial grounds. And it's just so important. And so people say to me, well, how many people come to your church? And I'll say, well, most of them. Because they go to the burial ground. That's the church. See, it's not this building with a roof and all that kind of stuff. They're forever. You go out to Little Flower, and just about every day there's people going to the burial ground to be with a person, grandparent, or whoever. That's church. To be where the Spirit is. Honeydew.
And some of them have their own family private cemetery, it's not in the group one.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, I was told, you see Little Flower Church, it's in the archives for the band, Lex band, said now you walk just a couple steps south of your church and then a couple more steps and you're going to be walking on hundreds of graves. Don't look like graves, they just look like grass and trees. But there are people buried everywhere. So all that ground is sacred. Holy ground. So I say, people trust me to do their burials. I mean, this person has died in Fargo and nobody's seen him for years, and, you know, but by bonding of family, we must bring him here and have him buried with family. I'm most willing to participate, you know, and again, with tobacco and with all the elements of ritual. Rick, we're going to Virgil.
I was going to ask you, when,
Yeah.
when were you appointed? And also, I haven't been following the diocesan paper well. What has Kettler himself said?
Well, this is an issue that came out in the month of May last month. Well, there's an excellent article written by the editor. And what has he said? Basically, stay in relationship with as many people as possible. He's not set up a bureaucracy in an office of be where people are. Tim, one questions.
As Crozier Associates, Father, what would you suggest to us as a prayer vehicle to deal with all of this history that is so difficult to deal with? How does the order do?
Well, I think number one is that each of us be open to the spirituality of the great mystery being part of all of life. And as the more we do that, the more we find ourselves in kinship with our native people. So that's beginning with the heart, okay? And then from there we move on. We might have prayers that reflect that kind of spirit. And we have a little bit of it. You know, we sing Canticle of the Son of St. Francis. Brother, sun, sister, moon, you know, all that kind of thing. But to open that up more and more. And again, I'm not being political here. I'm not doing ecology. Even though St. Francis is the patron saint of ecology, I'm not doing that. I'm doing that within my heart, and then I'm saying to all of you, if you have any opportunity to grab it, you know, in other words, you might be shopping or walking down the street or something. Bring yourself into the presence of that native person, whether it's by hello or, you know, by just, well, let me just do something here once. In this room, Sunday morning, there's coffee. And people go and sit with the people that they always sit with. No, you can't do that, you know, even though all of us might be, not all of us, but most of us might be Caucasian persons. Heart should be, I'm going to break my back to get to know a new person every Sunday. So it's the same thing with our native people, wherever we are, grocery store, whatever. It's not that we surround people and, you know, choke them, strangle them, but just, it's the old smile and hi, and then after 20, 30, 40 times of smiling and hi, you know, it's like, we're brothers, we're sisters. Because we're not turning our back on each other, but rather taking 2, 3, 4 steps to get closer to each other. And that will explode, that will evolve into real camaraderie. I mean, I know that from personal experience. Just hanging around the powwows and just, you know, just seeing somebody I know from somewhere else and saying hi. And it seems small, but it's powerful. Put myself into direct relationship with someone, just being, just holding the door for them, or whatever it is, you know. Man, that just turns loose all kinds of power, all kinds of spirit. But generally speaking, myself, I go and sit at the table where, or I go to down the aisle shopping center where nobody else is. I don't want to talk to anybody. It's that, natural instinct to not approach someone who's not familiar. So, yeah, Gary.
You mentioned something about prayer,
Okay, yeah.
and the associates. It escapes my mind at the moment, but the Croziers do have something where they pray in the 4 directions, and I don't know if that
Sure.
has roots in the,
No.
no,
I wish it did.
okay.
But then again, we can work with that. No, that comes from the Lebanese, from the Maronite rite. When they celebrate the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, that's exactly what they do. That's where Tom Enniking and I found that particular prayer. But again, it's 4 directions, and you can't imagine, as Rick told us before his prayer, the significance of 4 directions. Yes. And so there's a common meeting point right there.
The powwow. And
Yes.
that is such a beautiful resource that those of us that live in this area have. And it's the 3rd weekend of August. Everybody is so welcoming to go. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. So it starts on Friday evening is the initial.
And it's free.
Yes, and they're so welcoming, and they love when people come to take part.
Where?
It's on the powwow grounds. Yeah, about 3 miles up from the casino.
You just have to go past the casino and it's on the right hand side.
Now, Cirilla, were you ever on the powwow committee?
I was on the powwow committee for 16 years.
Whoa. So she's got some acquaintance with it.
Yeah, and so Mille Lacs is actually a traditional powwow over there. So they just have the Hinckley powwow, and that's
Competition.
yeah. Up in East Lake, they built powwow grounds up there too. So they're trying to make that traditional. It's traditional, but the one on Mille Lacs is known for it being a traditional powwow.
And it's really well attended.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
incredible. Yeah.
And again, it gives you a chance to experience the beauty of the language, but also the beauty of the music, and to see, it's wrong, to feel, I was going to say hear, it's actually to feel the heartbeat of Mother Earth. That's what all the drumming's about. Mother Earth, we're picking up her heartbeat. Looks like a drum, experience of drum and bugle corps or whatever, high school band, drums, no, this is spiritual. This is the heartbeat of Mother Earth being presented to us by believers.
When I was, I worked at myself years, and we had an actual seminar about how to relate to the Indian people. And we were told that we do not like to make eye contact. So when you're talking with them, that they get uncomfortable if you try to make eye contact with them. I don't know if this is,
I think that's less so now as the years have gone by, because just even having television has made a difference for a number of them interacting with things that are, in the white world. So I don't think that same feeling is so dominant anymore. But respect it if you notice it.
Yeah, but not looking at somebody sometimes directly like that is considered a sign of respect. Another YouTube video that you might watch is called "Everything You Want to Know About Indians and What We're Afraid to Ask." So it's something worth watching. Anton Troyer, who's written a lot of books already, that's one that he's written recently, and it's called, again, "Everything You Want to Know About Indians, What We're Afraid to Ask." So it's a good book. And a good YouTube. Kind of has him discussing it. His brother's also a writer, so wrote a book called Res Life, which is so sad. His grandfather was a World War II vet who committed suicide a few years ago. And David's job was to clean up his grandfather's room and that's how the book starts. So it's kind of based on real life. And, as you know, there's a lot of sad things that happen on the reservation, but there's a lot of happy things too, so a lot of good things.
I'm glad you mentioned that because here you get to know our Native people. There's constant humor, just
Teasing, joking.
yeah, just joking like all the time. So it's not a group of people to be afraid of, I mean, really. And but as you mentioned, see, Anton, no, was it his brother that wrote the book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee?
Yeah, that's right. I use that as a textbook, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, it's his brother David, yeah.
Yes. But again, if you want to know, well, here's a teacher, but also the New York Times, or wherever you go, you're going to find a professional person saying, if you want to know get familiar with the history, and again, professionally written, not a bunch of rumors and a bunch of hearsay, but professionally researched, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, that's where it's at.
So, a lot of you know about Dee Brown. He wrote a book called Bury My Heart of Wounded Knee.
Yeah.
And that was the first time, one of the first times in history where things were written a little bit more from an American Indian perspective, and it talked about kind of the other side of these wars and the battles and that. And so what David did then is he starts there where Wounded Knee kind of ends up, because he had this idea that everything died at Wounded Knee. But no, his point is that no, people have been struggling, people have been, living, people have been surviving, people have been resisting, people have done all these kinds of different things to just stay alive today, and to bring back. Part of it is just this idea of reclaiming and renaming and, revitalizing the language and the culture and all that. So and then it comes out strong in that book. It's called The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. The idea is that it's still going,
And that kind of picks up on what I mentioned before about the students and parents of the boarding schools. They found a way to be resilient, and that's what the book's all about. Is, well, okay, our culture, they try to squelch, they try to eliminate, they try to wipe out our language and religion, and well, that's not what happened. We are so resilient that we just keep coming back. Maybe in different formats sometimes, but we're here, we're part of this nation.
I think you've given us a great deal of resources and background now, and I think even within our 3 regions that we'll probably pursue this a little more. As you go forward, are you willing to come back and tell us about how things are going?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I'd love to, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and especially, part of a movement we started about 3-4 years ago to have a business manager so I could do some of these things in the realm of spirituality and worship. And I'm sort of hesitant. I mean, I want to do what I want to do, but I don't want to just walk into church on Sunday and do smudging and, I'm not, I just find that, I just think I might be offensive. If a Native person would like to do that ritual, I've done it many times. I've been part of it many times, but I'm just trying so hard to let our Native people speak from the heart about the mystery that they experience, the great mystery, instead of me organizing it for them or dictating it. Just because I think it's beautiful doesn't mean I should be in charge. Let them be in charge. Okay. That's not easy to do in the Catholic Church because we're a hierarchical way, which is so different from the Native person's way. And a good example, the Benedictine sisters, 7 years ago or 8, they sent me this memo from St. Ben's. They're going to come and dig up Sister Laura and take her to their burial cemetery. And I said, well, let's slow this down a little bit. we do things in a circle. Would you come and be a part of our circle? So we got our parishioners together. Again, of course, some of us are Caucasian type people, and some are Native persons who knew Sister Laura. And we sat in a circle for a couple hours, and Sister spoke, and everybody spoke, and the Sister said, we changed our mind, because I got to see the power of the group in conversation in a circle, instead of dictating from above. Like, we're going to come over and we're going to do this, and it's the Benson Funeral Home, when you go talk to the Benson Funeral Home and get this taken care of. No, sister, no. We're going to move as a group, everybody speaks, and everybody speaks again, and we have a talking circle, and we have a branch that we pass back and forth when you want to speak, and everybody is at the same level. So again, that's why I'm trying so hard to stay with that concept of working with people, not the ladder where I'm at the top of the ladder looking down on you poor slobs, but rather we're all in a circle, so we're all equal. I also say that marriage counseling. I say, now, we'll start with a table. Both of you must sit at a table. What? Yeah, so you're the same height. Oh, because usually one person's watching TV and the other person's standing behind that person, so the person that's standing is much taller, and they're not looking at each other, they're looking, so, no, gotta be at the table looking face to face, eyeball to eyeball, same height. And then we'll start having a conversation, the Indian way.
I think it was Sister Laura's request that she be buried there at Mille Lacs. At least that's what I understood.
Well, and actually what happened, yes, that's part of the story, but a group of our Native people went to St. Ben's and insisted that she be buried back here. They really put up a fight with the sisters a few moments after she died.
Okay. I was
They were
there, I
very
just can't
vocal.
remember the details.
Yeah, they were very, very strong. So she's part of the Holy Ground.
Thank you, Father Jerry. I think we need to sleep on this.
There might be one or two eye-opening parts to it.
No, I think there's much to discern.
And again, be watching, I don't know, but I mean, there are two things to watch as far as Pope Francis, is going to Canada for a face-to-face apology, and then what's he going to do about the United States?
Yep. Okay.
Don't let him off the hook.
Thank you very much.
Miigwech
Means
thank you.
in
Ojibwe miigwech thank you.